Out in the farmlands outside of Boise, Idaho, miles from the nearest town, you are surrounded by flat, dead agricultural fields and abandoned irrigation canals. When you live completely cut off from the rest of the world, that extreme isolation creates a strange sense of security. You assume that because no one is around, no one can get to you. Now, this diagram shows the layout of the farmhouse's second floor. Because the house was ancient, the floors creaked constantly, and the pipes knocked in the walls. Normal architectural sounds were simply part of living there. But notice this space directly across the narrow hall from the primary bedroom. That was a storage room. The landlord casually dismissed that space as a place for storage junk, claiming the door simply stuck during the winter. As you can see, a thick metal lock had been installed on the outside of that door. When a heavy lock is placed on the outside of an empty room, you tend to accept it as an impenetrable boundary. That distance from civilization builds a psychological trap. You feel so physically disconnected from society that you convince yourself a locked interior door is enough to keep any potential threats completely outside your living space. For the first month, the house was entirely normal. Then, exactly at 2 a.m., slow pacing started upstairs. Soft footsteps moving across the hallway floorboards. It was easy to blame the house settling at first, but the movement always followed a specific path, stopping directly outside the bedroom door every single night. Stepping into the hallway to investigate revealed a sharp drop in temperature. The air upstairs was freezing and carried the heavy smell of dust, rotting wood, and something sour. The storage room door presented an immediate problem. The same heavy door that was locked from the outside earlier that evening was now standing open by exactly 1 inch. Inside, among the broken furniture and stained blankets, an old wooden chair sat directly against the far wall, facing the corner. It looked deliberately placed, as if someone had just been sitting in it. By the next morning, that chair had been turned completely around, facing the open doorway, looking exactly where anyone investigating the hall would have stood. The lock on the hallway door no longer served its purpose. If a barrier inside the house could be opened from the other side, there was no longer a meaningful distinction between the hallway and the room where the pacing began. Over the following weeks, physical evidence of another presence began accumulating in the shared spaces. Blankets in the storage room were dragged across the floor. Downstairs, basic groceries started going missing: milk, bread, canned food. At the time, it was easy to write off as simple forgetfulness. Then came the morning the hallway floor was covered in wet, muddy footprints. They tracked halfway down the dark hardwood corridor before they abruptly disappeared, leaving no logical path back to an exit. Faced with physical proof of an intruder roaming the halls, the tenant started deadbolting the bedroom door every single night. The rest of the house was effectively surrendered to establish a final, tighter boundary of safety. When footprints vanish in the middle of a hallway, the house stops being a home and starts feeling like an obstacle course. By locking the bedroom door, you aren't just securing a room, you're acknowledging that you've lost control over every other square inch of the house. At 2:30 a.m., the isolation broke completely. The room was pitch black. Cutting through the silence was the sound of slow, wet breathing coming from somewhere directly inside the bedroom. A sweep of the room with a phone flashlight showed nothing standing by the bed. However, the closet door, firmly shut before sleep, was now standing wide open. Take a look at this cross-section of the shared wall. Right near the back of the closet, hidden behind hanging clothes, a small rectangular hole had been cleanly cut directly into the drywall. This newly opened physical passage bypassed the locks completely, connecting the inside of the closet straight to the restricted storage room on the other side. Then came a faint scraping sound. It wasn't echoing from the hallway, but shifting from deep inside the wall itself. The tenant grabbed their keys and immediately fled the property, driving 20 minutes into town to wait in a gas station parking lot until sunrise. External locks and solid wood doors provide an illusion of control. Those traditional boundaries are rendered entirely useless when the structural walls meant to protect you are actually being utilized as hidden pathways to move freely through the home. A morning phone call with the landlord forced out the history of the farmhouse. The previous tenant had abruptly moved out after complaining about someone watching him sleep from inside the walls. The landlord assumed it was paranoia, until contractors later uncovered a network of narrow, unsealed crawlspaces hidden between the walls during renovations decades earlier. 2 police deputies arrived that afternoon to search the house. In the upstairs storage room, a flashlight beam caught deep gouges heavily scarring the wooden floorboards, tracking straight toward a heavy antique wardrobe. Moving it aside revealed a narrow wooden door, concealed entirely within the architecture. This 3D wireframe maps out the police findings, a parasitic network of crawlspaces snaking through the walls, where deputies documented hidden blankets and food wrappers. Dozens of peepholes were drilled through the drywall, offering clear lines of sight directly into the private living areas. The missing groceries and the pacing in the hallway tracked directly to a parallel living space, occupied by a highly patient intruder, quietly sustaining themselves inside the walls for weeks. Before the search concluded, one of the deputies returned from the passage. He asked if the tenant owned a specific item, before silently presenting a photograph taken deep inside the wall sleeping quarters. Resting on a filthy blanket in the claustrophobic darkness of the wooden crawlspace was a small digital alarm clock, the exact clock that usually sat on the bedside table. That clock didn't belong in the crawlspace. It belonged on the bedside table. For it to be here, the person behind the wall had to walk into the bedroom, reached across the bed, and taken it while the tenant was fast asleep. The tenant moved out that exact night, leaving most of their furniture behind, and never returned. 3 months later, the farmhouse was sold to a young family. During their initial renovations, contractors broke through a ceiling and discovered a secondary passage connecting directly up into the attic. Inside that newly discovered passage, they found fresh footprints, recently opened food, and a heavy flashlight with fully charged batteries. Escaping the house didn't mean escaping the person inside it. As long as those passages remain, the house continues to function as 2 separate homes, one for the family paying rent, and one for the person watching them from the dark.